In 1851, the U.S. government passed the Indian Appropriations Act, creating reservation lands for Native Americans. But in placing them on reservations, the U.S. government often forced Native Americans to live on subpar land under harsh conditions. So, today, we're going to take a look at what life on a Native American reservation is really like. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other parts of Native American history you would like to hear about. Okay, let's do this. For decades prior to the creation of the reservation system, the U.S. government had forcefully and violently relocated Native American tribes, most notably through the Indian Removal Act and the notorious Trail of Tears under President Andrew Jackson. Reservations were created in 1851, but for the people intended to live there, the rules were oppressive and unfamiliar. By 1887, President Grover Cleveland signed the Dawes Act that allotted land to each Native American family to promote ranching and agriculture, ostensibly to improve their economic condition and assimilate culturally. It looked good on paper, but it had the opposite effect. Never trust a guy named Grover. This act broke up lands into lots, some not productive or profitable. And at the end of a 25-year moratorium on taxes, many Native Americans had to sell the property that had been allotted to pay state taxes, often excessive. The result was landless families, fractured tribes, and a checkerboard of farmland that could not be worked efficiently by anybody. It may have seemed like a great idea, but it had devastating cultural and economic impact. During the 20th century, Native American life was directly tied to the reservation system, and until the 1950s, most Native Americans lived on reservations. Today, the majority of Native Americans live in cities, but for the roughly 1.2 million who live on the 326 reservations across the U.S., life is still difficult. Tribes have had sovereignty since the signing of the U.S. Constitution. What sovereignty meant has been a point of debate among the tribes and with local, state, and federal governments. But throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, Native Americans lost many of their rights and land. The Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 sought to correct this by encouraging tribes on reservations to draft constitutions, implement laws, and conduct court proceedings. Every tribe is run and organized differently, but they're run by some tribal authority and are exempt from most federal and state laws. Tribal councils control membership, property conduct, and tribal justice. Tribal councils have some form of election and represent the interests of their members and the tribe as a whole. However, while Native Americans and federally recognized tribes are members of their respective nations and enjoy a level of autonomy, they are still legal citizens of the United States. In fact, modern reservations are mostly held in trust by the federal government, while tribes that live on reservations are self-governing entities. So while you live on a reservation, you're subjected to and protected by laws of your tribal nation as well as those of the federal government. It's similar to how state governments operate. However, the multiple jurisdictions of tribal, state, and federal governments has had a complicating effect on crime and the justice system. Due in part to jurisdictional issues, low police staffing, and large areas, reservations experience comparatively high crime rates and low prosecution rates even compared to other rural settings. Violence against women is more common among Native American groups. Even if an assault happens on a reservation, there are few resources and support options for Native women. Due to differences in legal systems, Native American courts do not have jurisdiction to prosecute non-tribal people. They would have to be tried in state or federal courts. Data also indicates that deaths by homicide were more than 2 times likely for Americans living on reservations between 2009 and 2011. These high homicide rates can be linked to alcohol abuse, drug addiction and trafficking, and gang activity. There is great income disparity within the 574 federally recognized tribes, largely due to gaming activity. But extreme poverty exists for many tribes, and reservations have been compared to developing countries. In 2014, the median income for all Native Americans and Alaska Natives was just over $37,000. But some indigenous people living on reservations reportedly earn less than $10,000 a year. That's well below the national poverty threshold of $12,500 for a single-person household. In fact, Northwestern University estimates that up to 1/3 of all Native American households has income below the poverty line. For example, Oglala Lakota County, South Dakota, home of the Pine Ridge Reservation, has a per capita income of just $8,768, the lowest in the nation. Many reservations lack running water and electricity, and residents often live in shacks, trailers, and broken-down houses. That overcrowding is a result of limited resources, with households struggling to survive. Grandparents, parents, and children live with family members who cannot afford housing of their own. These living situations also mean childcare often falls to grandparents. In other cases, children remain unsupervised while their parents are away at work. And while every kid dreams of not having a babysitter, it's almost never in their best interest. In addition, poor living conditions hamper children's ability to do schoolwork. Cheryl Locke, a teacher at the Pine Ridge Reservation, left the reservation to get a college degree and returned to teach. She regularly sees students without study supplies or even their own beds. According to her, many of the children sleep on floors or wherever they can, and then they're expected to perform 100%. There is some evidence that income levels on reservations may be slowly rising, but Native Americans not living on reservations earn almost twice as much as those who do. Understandably, this fact has caused tension within reservations. According to one study in Native News, Native Americans are, on one hand, encouraged to move into a city, go to school, find a job, perhaps start a family, and at the same time pulled to stay on the reservation, where there's family and generations of support. Making this latter option difficult is the reality that while urban areas are increasingly becoming rife with promise and opportunity, tribal government has a high turnaround rate, which can lead to economic uncertainty because the majority of jobs are tied to tribal government. Dustin Monroe, a member of the Blackfeet Nation, echoed this by saying, "People are drawn off reservations because of instability. Of course, you could always get a job at the casino if government work isn't for you." While federal and tribal government jobs make up a majority of the employment opportunities on many reservations, the reservations themselves often depend on tourism and gambling money to survive. When Congress passed the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act in 1988, it opened up tribal lands to unrestricted gambling enterprises. Since then, tribal nations in 29 states have opened casinos, bingo halls, and other gambling businesses. The revenue these businesses garner varies by state and location, but annual revenue for all Native American gaming reportedly exceeds $32 billion. While some Native Americans believe the act has helped to stabilize reservation income, others find it controversial. Along with gambling, many reservations receive income from tourists. Some host traditional events to teach visitors about their culture, while others feature nature reserves and other recreational activities. Native Americans living on reservations rely on Indian Health Services, or IHS, for medical care. Unfortunately, the IHS has been underfunded since its creation in the 1970s. The IHS receives a lump sum of money each year to treat and care for all Native Americans living on reservations, regardless of need or number. While more than half of Native Americans now live off-reservation, the healthcare gap between Native populations and other Americans demonstrates the continued lack of access, opportunity, and information among Native groups. Clinics on reservations often have limited hours, don't let patients make appointments, and lack important equipment like MRI machines. According to Donna Keeler, the director of South Dakota Urban Indian Health, federal prisoners receive more care than people living on reservations. Both drug abuse and alcoholism are also prevalent. Technically, 2/3 of reservations in the U.S. are mandated dry by the tribal governments to combat high alcoholism rates. But there are bars and liquor stores just outside reservation boundaries, so the effectiveness of these dry laws are often minimal. Studies show teenagers on reservations are much more likely to use serious drugs like methamphetamine. Between 2006 and 2014, drug cases on reservations reportedly increased drastically. Calls for prevention programs, especially in the face of high fetal alcohol syndrome numbers and incidents of babies born addicted to meth, have emphasized the importance of local support systems. But with a lack of access to adequate health care and substance abuse treatment facilities, Native Americans are more than 4 times more likely to die of liver disease, 3 times more likely to die of diabetes, and almost twice as likely to die of pneumonia or influenza. The life expectancy for Native Americans is considerably shorter than the national average. Studies show that between 2009 and 2011 was more than 5 years below that of any other racial group in the United States. That sounds bad, and it is. But it's actually an improvement from 1970, when the life expectancy for Native Americans was only 44 years, 30% lower than other Americans. However, life expectancy for Native Americans varies by state and reservation. In some areas, it can be as much as 20 years shorter than that of other Americans. For example, at the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, life expectancy hovers in the upper 40s for men and mid-50s for women, far below the state's already low average. Some homes and buildings on reservations lack running water due to the remote location and the lack of reservation infrastructure. In Arizona and Utah, for example, people living on Navajo Nation land regularly visit watering holes 5 to 6 miles away to retrieve water. At the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, some people have lived their entire lives without running water or electricity. That's less than 100 miles from Mount Rushmore, one of the most famous national parks in the United States. But running water is only part of the problem. Insufficient sanitation and groundwater pollution further limit access to clean drinking water. In North Dakota, Nebraska, and other western states, mining operations and outdated wells contaminate water on reservations. In Arizona, for example, numerous health conditions and high rates of child death are linked to uranium contamination. In 2016, a major protest took place at the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota, where people from across the country joined Native American water protectors in protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline. During construction, engineers rerouted the oil pipeline through tribal lands, reportedly without tribal permission. Protesters engaged in a months-long battle to stop the pipeline's construction and deter water contamination at Standing Rock. But in the end, the U.S. government allowed construction to continue. Reservations play an essential role in preserving Native American culture. In 1978, the federal government passed the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, which made it legal for Native Americans to carry out their indigenous spiritual beliefs and practices. The act allowed them to use bones and feathers from eagles, which are a protected species, use controlled substances in religious ceremonies, and access and control the access of others to certain areas they consider sacred. Native Americans who encountered Christianity, especially Roman Catholicism, often blended native beliefs with those of Catholicism, creating a fusion of faiths. A robust Catholic presence remains on reservations in the larger Native American community. Today, an estimated 20 to 25% of Native Americans identify as Catholic. Additionally, Congress has passed several pieces of legislation aimed at protecting Native languages since the 1970s. Native languages, many of which were specifically targeted by assimilation efforts at forced boarding schools, have experienced a new life around the country since the 1960s. Some experts attribute this resurgence to the language's continued use on reservations. Many reservations have implemented language immersion programs that bring tribe members together to strengthen the use of their ancestral speech. Native language retention programs in reservation schools across the U.S. are also helping to carry on linguistic traditions and preserve them for future generations. So what do you think? Which of these facts about life on Native American reservations surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.